In this video, we're going to take a look at the heel menu. The heel menu covers a whole range of different options, from basic shape of the heel cup, thickness of the heel cup, but also medial flanges, lateral flanges, scythes, and extrinsic and intrinsic heel posting. So to start with, the obvious one is the heel cup height. We can change the height dynamically, we can type in a prescriptive number, or we can just hop around backwards and forwards. It's important to note here, if I go to a semi-transparent view, that the heel cup can be anything from 0 all the way up to, as we've had it set here, about 40. But we could make this even bigger if you had the need. But most people tend to hover around, on average, around the 14mm mark. But if we do go higher, you can get a weakness around here because your material's fairly thin and it can become less supportive. And if you want more structure, what do? Well, we have a tool here to add thickness. So to show you the extremes, I'll put 5mm in here. And you can see it's throwing a huge amount of material around the outside of our heel cup to give it stiffness. More likely, though, you're going to select something more like about 1mm for that. Now that starts here at the tail end of the arch, a medial and lateral arch around the heel cup. But what if I want stiffness in the arch itself? So if I look down this view here, the arch has got quite a sharp edge to it, and as I grow the arch height, it stays sharp. But this 1mm, I can push it down the medial edge, and you'll see there in the graphical view up here how it's adding that material and removing it. Okay. Likewise, we can do that on the lateral side as well, and we can move it down. Now, please note here, and you can see it clearly in the graphical view, we are making our device wider. So if I'm moving it both down the medial and lateral side, I am adding a thickness of 1 plus 1, which is 2mm to the overall width of my device. So you have to bear that in mind. Okay, so that's that. Why would I do that? To add stiffness down the edge? Probably because I'm going to have a medial flange. And the medial flange, as you know, adds a very steep edge to support the side of the foot off the arch. Now, it's important to note here that the number 14 there is not the overall height of the medial flange and arch. It is an increment, so it's got an asterisk next to it here saying it's a relative adjustment. That means that if my arch height is 20mm and my medial flange is 14, my overall height is going to be 34. So it's an incremental step. And likewise, we can add a lateral flange to do the same thing. Okay, take those off, and also I'll take that thickness out as well. I think we'll just zero these out. So moving further on down the menu, we have our heel posting options. So here I'm going to remove the scan so I can show you what happens. The intrinsic post simply rotates the heel cup region that is proximal of the arch apex. So it twists the device to create the rotation in degrees, either on the medial side or the lateral side, valgus or varus. Now, what it's doing when I have this post is it's automatically applying a little tiny flat on the bottom because it's leaving my forefoot stable, but my rear foot also has to be stable too. So as I rotate my heel cup, it's always going to give me a small flat to give me stability on my device. And that becomes really clear if I increase its size. So there's an option down here called Intrinsic Posting Length Offset. If I make that to 2mm, it makes an even bigger flat in that heel region there. And as I rotate my posting, it always keeps that plane for me. Okay, forgive me stability. Okay, that's a bit too big. Down back to 1. So the other type of intrinsic posting that we have is a thing called an inversion. So rather than rotating the rear foot to create the posting, it rotates the entire device whilst keeping the first and the fifth planted in the forefoot plane. So if I turn that on, you'll see now as I rotate that it's very extreme and it's rotating the entire device but keeping the forefoot untouched. Okay, the distal edge. So that's the inversion. Now I've got a shell up here, which means I have the option, or the opportunity rather, to have an extrinsic post. By default, I get this great big lump of plastic, which is really useful if I'm going to do milling, because I don't really want to spend too much time creating very, very complex and time-consuming contours when I can simply run a tool around the edge and mill the top flat if necessary and just mill this edge here. But if I want to spend more time on the machining to get a better result for my posting or a lighter posting, what I can do is put a taper on that post. You can see there that I've tapered it down, and that will be a neater fit into the shoe. And also I can add a fillet on the bottom of it, a rounded edge. And finally, I think I've already shown this, but we'll show it again, is I can change how big that posting is, whether you want it light and small or heavy and long. You can do that too. Okay, you might want to do something like this if you're 3D printing as well. So you can put a very, very big taper angle on there. Oh, by the way, note, if your taper, this is just pure geometry, if your taper becomes bigger than the inside clinical surface of your device, it will tell you by making it blue. This is not good. You've got two ways of solving this. One is to reduce the taper angle on your post, which makes sense to me. But if you really want that tight taper, the only other way that you will get material back in there so that this whole device doesn't have a hole in it in the end is to increase that edge around the back by maybe another millimeter to give you some more thickness to play with. In reality here, I'm going to go with a 1 millimeter there, and I'm going to shrink that taper angle down to something a bit more sensible, maybe about 10 degrees. Okay, right. The next thing I wanted to show you is a heel lift. Now, actually, there are three options in the heel menu for creating or a result that is lifting the heel or dropping the forefoot. So the first one can only be done when you have a posting, okay, and it's called heel lift. The heel lift works by giving you extra height on your posting, okay. Now, if I didn't have an extrinsic post, just an intrinsic post, that option will do absolutely nothing, okay. So with the posting, extrinsic posting, it will work. Now, the other option is down the bottom of the menu or nearer the bottom, which is heel wedge and heel pitch. Heel wedge simply adds material under the heel cup and lifts the inner surface up, morphing it up to keep the anatomy of the foot but rotate it towards the forefoot. So I've put 7 millimeter wedge in here, but I've also got a 3 millimeter thickness in there already, so the material under my heel is now going to be 10 millimeters, okay. And you can choose what you need there. Now, if I wanted to create a rotational lift, I can use heel pitch. Now, heel pitch will have the effect of dropping the forefoot down, and it will cause the foot to rotate forwards. Okay. So those are the three options: lifting the post, adding material under the heel, or dropping the forefoot down. Okay, so I'm going to go back up the menu now to look at scythes. Now, scythes, there is a lot of capability here, and what it allows you to do is to add a thickness of scythe. In this case, I've gone to 3 millimeters of material inwards into the heel cup. Okay, and I can change the angle of that scythe in three different planes. In the coronal plane, it has the effect of moving the scythe up the side of your device. Okay, now I'm going to note here that you get this very crude representation of a scythe, and that's because we're doing dynamic graphics. All of our graphics are very much simplified until we export, and when we export, all of these sharp features become rounded and smooth and high definition. So what we would get here is a very nice elliptical shape for our scythe. So this is just a representation. If I change that plane, we can come up the side or back down into the heel cup. The sagittal plane allows us to move the scythe distal or proximal on the device Ignore this area here. This is just the plane poking through. What we're working with here is this here. We'll get very long scythe in here by making it go more distal. So that's in the sagittal plane. Now, if I rotate in the transverse plane, the final one, is it will rotate around the shape itself. Now this is just for tuning the shape. You can get a slightly different shape of scythe by doing this, but that is really a choice, a preference, whatever you want. So we've got a medial scythe and all these planar options. We also have the same on the lateral side. So on the lateral side, we can once again add more. Now you wouldn't likely add both at the same time, but just to show you what they do, the same thing. We can move the coronal, move up the coronal plane. We can also move in the sagittal plane. Now you have to be really careful here, because doing this actually will create a lift down the whole side if you come too far distal. Once again, transverse plane, but I'm going to switch that one off and keep the one on the medial side. Right. Finally, on our heel menu, we have the ability to add scythes to the posting. So down here, we have these options to add a scythe on the proximal edge or the distal edge of the post. So what I'm going to do here, just so you can see it clearly, I'm going to turn off the rounded edge, come back down here, and if I increase this scythe depth here, you will see it start to appear on the distal edge. Okay, and we change the plane of that to make it steeper or more shallow, okay, depending on what you want to do. Okay, also we can have a scythe on the proximal edge of our device, so at the heel strike point, and we can make that angle in such a way that it will be either aggressive or fairly light over the surface, depending on both the size and the angle we have on that posting. Once again, and take that off. Okay, so that really covers all of the items that are in the heel menu. There's a lot in here, but once you get used to it, it's very easy to navigate and very powerful to give you the shapes you need in the rear foot of the device.